Welcome, everybody. My name is Sejal Thakkar, and I'm the Chief Culture Officer for Nobody Studios. You're welcome here today because we're having an amazing conversation. Let's be real for a second. Managing human beings, well, human beings, first of all, are complicated, right? They're complex people, and to manage them is really no easy task. And so, especially when you're doing it for like Nobody Studios, we have people all over the globe. They're working remotely, most of whom have never even met in person. So today on Nobody Culture, we're going to be talking about, how do we adapt? How do we effectively collaborate and innovate together, especially when we're scaling? And so one of the ways that we're doing it at Nobody Studio is really being intentional about building a feedback rich culture. And so there's no one else better to talk to on this topic than one of our special nobodies, Daniel Bernard. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you, Sejal. I love being a special nobody. It's the best title I could ever have wished for.
Oh my God, thank you. Well, we're going to be talking about today a really important issue about building stronger cultures. So, Daniel has over 20 years of experience in building operations and platforms in the sports industry. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I know that Daniel and I share a lot of similar beliefs. For example, and Daniel, please correct me if I'm wrong. We're both servant. We're, we're both servant leaders, right? And we both share similar beliefs that in order to create high performing, or what we like to call winning teams, that we need both diversity and open dialogue, right? Am I right on that, Daniel?
100%.
So one of the things we always say at Nobody Studios is we're going to be defined by the people that we attract to our journey. And so, Daniel, can you share a little bit about what attracted you to the Nobody Studios journey?
So I think the luck of it was that when I got involved was back in my first interaction with the studio was through Jason, business development manager. He's such a wonderful guy. And he reached out to me, and it was in 2021, early 2021. And it was in that period, due to COVID, thanks to COVID, in some ways, where you had space in your mind to think about things beyond the day-to-day. And because of that, I engaged happily with Jason. We chatted, and he introduced me to Mark, Chief Nobody. I always love that title.
Yes,
And
I try to say it at least once during every show because I just love saying that.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And it means a lot. It really says a whole lot about Mark and then what filters down from his leadership through to the whole of the studio. And and I told Mark straight up, as an investor, I invest in sports. That's the only thing I know. I don't invest from a venture point of view in anything else. And he said, that's fine. Let's just chat anyway. And I thought, okay, I've managed expectations. I'm not going to invest. Fine. But we got on really, really well. And so we had another call and then another call. And then he did a very clever thing. He introduced me to the leadership team. I think that was the first time actually.
That's right.
And I got to be introduced on, it was just the regular weekly leadership call. And I was just invited to be a fly on the wall, which was a great privilege. And, all the leadership team of Nobody was there, and I got introduced. And what I witnessed that evening was just the dynamic between everyone. And it was clear to me that I had not only, become so enamored with Mark as a person, I could see that there was a shared value amongst all the people. And the way the conversation was going was, you had Mark sort of directing the conversation, but giving everyone a place to say what they want and what they need to say. But it wasn't just everyone just says what they want. It's very structured, and the openness and the empowerment that everyone had. I mean, we talk about senior executives, they should be like that, but it's not always the case. Let's face it, in businesses. And you get to a stage in business where you think to yourself, well, I only really want to work with a certain type of people who see the world like I do and have shared values. And I was looking at this going, I want to be part of this. I called Mark about 10 minutes later. I said, yeah, I'm investing now. Come on. I know it's not sports, but I want to be part of this in some way. And so I was happy to put my investment in the hat, and more than that, and to be an ambassador for Nobody Studios, because it was treated just in that simple dialogue in the way that I love to do business. And you don't see that as often as you should in the corporate world, that's for sure. So that was the attraction. That's why I'm involved for the last almost 2 years now, and I couldn't be happier.
Well, and I remember that meeting because that was the first time that I learned about you and I met you. And I could tell you, like, immediately I felt a connection, right? I was like, this is good people. Welcome to the team, Daniel. And that's why when I first joined the studio, is I created this document called the Culture Manifesto or Playbook, right? And it was to highlight certain aspects of our culture and expectations and kind of included in our onboarding program, right? And so after a lot of, we almost like doubled in size, Mark said, our chief nobody, right, said, why don't you meet with some of the leaders and get feedback on this document so we can, we're always looking to, again, improve what we've created. And so immediately you popped into my head, right? And I was like, wait, I don't know Daniel that well, but I started following you by that point on LinkedIn. I was familiar with your philosophy of leadership, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on it. And I won't forget, like, the feedback you gave me. You gave me some really substantive feedback that was very helpful. Like you said, some of this information might be repetitive, or you said some of this information, maybe you want to include it somewhere else. Like, it's more operational rather than culture. And you really sort of helped me hone in on, Sejal, like, stay focused on your core values, and the behavior sort of guide rails and expectations. And I literally took off after your feedback, Daniel. First of all, thank you again for that. But I literally chopped out like 7 or 8 slides from my PowerPoint deck after I listened to your feedback. And so this is really important to me because I've been counseling and leading and working with leaders my whole career as an employment law attorney. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen leaders get that wrong. A lot of times they focus in on the mistakes. It's so subjective, or it's sporadic feedback. It's not really helpful, right? And so I really want to zone in on this conversation that you and I are having today to really focus on helping leaders understand that giving effective feedback is super important, but also it's a two-way street, right? Leaders can learn a lot from feedback that they receive from their client. I mean, they're from their teams as well. So Daniel, what advice do you have for leaders? And again, I would love it if you can kind of focus your guidance on kind of studios like ours, where we're remote, we have teams all over, because this is a more unique challenge now than it ever has been, right?
So, I mean, this is an enormous challenge that a lot of the world is facing, is how to retain a culture. Let's use that word straight off the bat. How to retain and even enhance a culture when you're not meeting in the corridor of the office every day, and you're not like by the water cooler and making coffee together, which was a real big part of the connection that people felt between each other. Just that. And I'm a bit old school, with the remote. I was like, oh, but we're missing out on so much. And so it was a big rethink. And for me, it was the success or failure in being able to enhance that culture all comes down to belonging to something. And I know this is something that you hold very, very dear. At the end of the day, people want to belong to something. It's way beyond the merch you might get when you join a company. People will forget the fancy hat and you know what? They'll even forget the signing on bonus. Doesn't matter how fat that is. What they will remember, and companies really need to focus in on, is making sure people belong. And material things are lovely, they really are, but they're never going to make people belong. So you have to connect to people's values, their mindset, just the way that Mark and I connected in that very first meeting. And the reason why I saw that I can belong to this crowd of nobodies, and I want to be a nobody too, because I saw something in common. And you and I get on great. I get on great with Mark. I get on great with Tiffany. I get on great with Barry. I've never met any of you in person, and yet I feel like I know you. So there's something that we have a shared bond between us, and that all comes down to a sense of belonging to something that connects us. And every organization needs to find what that is, to say it out loud, and to then find the people that can connect to that. And it starts when you hire. A lot of people hire, the best, the rock stars in their specific field. Personally, it's first and foremost people who are connected to what our values are and what we want to do, what we want to be. And if we have a shared ambition in life, then you don't actually need the rock stars. It'd be great to have both, but I pick that over the rock star any day of the week, because if you've got good employees, you don't want anything less than good, but good employees who are connected to you, they will go way beyond, and they will become your rock stars.
Yes, it's so true.
And so really think about, how do I, and it's different, going to be different for every company. There's no playbook here. Every company needs to think, what will connect the people with who we are at our core? And that's why having core values is so important. A lot of companies just have core values as an add-on to just tick a box. You can see right through that. Really need to think about it. What makes us tick? What gets us out of bed in the morning? What are we trying to do in this world as people? Not just turning $1 into $2. So trying to connect the people to that and have that sense of belonging is critical, whether you're working in the office or not. And it's even more critical when you're remote, because if you don't have that physical interaction, then you need that belonging. Anyways, that's first of all, I think, is just so basic. And then when we're talking about then being part of an organization, you mentioned it just before when you asked the question. It feels like half an hour ago.
No.
It's a two-way dialogue, and a lot of people forget that. And we talk about feedback. We wanted to talk about feedback and giving, taking people from one step to the next step. It should never ever be just right. Here's a list of things. This you did well. This you did wrong. Blah blah blah. Go away. Improve. Okay.
I hope people are listening to this. I really do, because this is so important. I already know what you're going to say before you say it, but please say it. And I hope people are really paying attention. By the way, what you're saying is super resonating with people, because John Granholm just put this in here. And I just want to read this out loud, because who doesn't love Maya Angelou? But I love this quote. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that goes right along with what you're talking about, belonging. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just love that. I just had to jump in with that. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thanks, John, for bringing that up. It's a really pertinent quote. I think it's really, really important that everyone has that focus. I would even recommend putting that up on the wall in an office,
right,
just to make sure people are focused on it. But two-way dialogue is so important. And what does that mean, even a two-way dialogue? I have someone who's been working with me for over 10 years now. She's my executive assistant, but that's just totally doesn't do her justice. She's much more like chief of staff. She just manages everything. I don't know what I'd do without her. She reminded me recently, she's been working with me now for over 10 years. She said, after 6 months of working with you, we had a performance development review. And she said, you sat me down. It says the most impressive thing I had was, after going through my performance, she said to me, she says, Daniel, you asked me about your performance as my boss. And for me, that was obvious. It was like, am I giving you the tools that you need to succeed at your job? And that's what I'm saying as a two-way dialogue. Is like, there's accountability. I'm big on accountability. I don't ever believe that we should do everything for our employees. Otherwise, what are they there for? We've got to give, as managers, we've got to give them the infrastructure and the tools to be able to do their job as well as they possibly can. And then it's their accountability. But because there's two parties here at play, I wanted to give her feedback on how I see her going, and also thinking about going forward. How do we then take it to the next level? But I also asked, I said, are you getting what you need from me?
Yeah.
And then she has a voice, and anyone hearing this sort of discussion has a voice. They're invited to say what they think. And the important thing is, we might not agree, but it's a dialogue. And understanding that the best decisions come from a dialogue from different people. And there's someone who's going to take the decision. Say the boss, for want of a better word, he's got the decision making. He or she, sorry, has the decision making position. But no one has all the answers. You need to get input from various places. And if you've got a team, if the manager is the one who says we're going to do X, Y, Z, then and your team are only executing, then you're missing out. You have to say, this is what I think. What do you guys think? And invite them into the arena to help get to the best decisions. And that goes for everything, for feedback, for creating a new project, for deciding on a pivot or a new strategy, whatever. You've got your team, use them, because no one sees everything. We all have our own little. That's right.
And usually they know how to improve what they're doing better than you do, because they do it every single day, right? So if you're talking about lean process improvement, a CEO that doesn't really do that job is not going to have an idea of how to make that job better. Ask the person that does it every day and is like, I can do this a lot quicker. If somebody would just ask me how, I can tell them, right? Like, I remember back when I was in college, right? And you're going to appreciate this analogy, right? When the Bulls were the thing. I mean, we were winning all those, championship rings. It was on fire, Daniel. We were like, talk about like living it up. When you were in Chicago in that time, it was something else. But I remember going to a lot of these games, right? And I would always think about how I was so impressed with the fact that they would do a major screw up, And then they're in that game, like going for that rim again, right? And they just get right back into it. And in the audience, I would sit there and I'm like, how are they not like getting distracted by that, screw up that they just did and the mistake that they just made? Like, how could they just keep going forward? And, and you ask, and you know this better than I do, you're in that sports industry, right? Like high performance athletes and successful leaders are always sort of focused in on the future, right? Here's where we need to get to. Here's the vision. And Mark McNally is incredible at that because he's always focused on the vision, where he's like, here's what we need to do. Now, here are the steps is where I need your help. Like, here's the vision. He always is coming back to focusing on the future and then channeling our efforts to sort of anticipate, here are some of the things, here are some of the problems. Now, nobody can anticipate the pandemic. Nobody can, anticipate what just happened with Silicon Valley Bank. There are things that are going to happen. And so you have to be willing to adapt and adapt quickly. Right. And so there's this whole new, like, sort of thing that, I love this quote that Peter Drucker had, right, where, and I bring this up because I think this says a lot about leaders, is the leaders from the past knew how to tell their teams what to do. So you ask one of these athletes, what their coach, how their coach is, and okay, the leader's going to say, do this, this, and this if you get this certain play. But the leader of the future will know how to ask, right? And so when you talk about coaches, asking your players the right questions. And so I was just going to ask you, first of all, does that quote even resonate with you? And
of course.
yeah. And what are your thoughts on why is asking so important?
So it goes into, there's a few things that we've just discussed as well. And the only thing I disagree about in that quote is not leaders of the future, it's leaders of the present. Mm-hmm. It's today. You can't get by just thinking, because if you're just about the telling, then it assumes that I know and I have all the answers. Mm-hmm. It has to be that I only have a certain amount of knowledge. And as a manager, as a leader, my job is not actually to know it all. That's not my job. My job is to pull the pieces together. And if we think about Nobody Studios for a second, that's exactly what Nobody Studios is there to do, is to join thousands of dots around the globe.
That's right.
Okay? To bring in pieces of knowledge from places that we would have no access to, the world would have no access to find that, Mark says it so beautifully, it's like the next big technology development in the future is not going to come from some, Silicon Valley based, entrepreneur. It's going to come from some 13-year-old girl in India. Mm-hmm. Mark says that, and we've got to understand that it's accessing information, and that's what leadership and let's say the studio as a macrocosm of that is there to do, is to try and join those dots. It's not to say this is how it's going to be done. And so joining those dots, bringing them together, and then asking all those dots, all those people, what do you think? How do we make this better? And then cleverly and sophisticated, trying to filter that information into decisions. That is the important thing. And I wanted to take up something you said before as well. In a big organization, and I've got like the company that I set up in 2004, it's about 250 employees now. It's a mid-sized company. You've got to be able to connect in order to, just some practical advice. If you've got the people executing work at the bottom level, that's a terrible statement, bottom level. You know what I mean? Like they're sitting there executing work. This is a sports data operation. So people that's running the data and whatever. They have to be aware, everyone from that layer all the way to senior management have to be 100% aware of what the company is about. Yes. And what it's trying to achieve, what its overall vision is. Because if you don't expose everyone in the company, then those people will be subject to just doing what they're doing simply because the manager above them told them what to do.
Right.
And it is a sick company, or not a totally healthy company, just to be a little bit more easy on it. When you ask someone in the company, why do you do this? Why do you do it this way? If the answer is because that's what I was told to do,
yes,
that's an indication that they don't know. If they know, I do this because it leads into this, that leads into that, it's what the company's trying to do. Okay? And if you've got that as your basis, then you can open up the floor to those same people to say and ask them, how do you do your job better? Because like you said before, Sejal, they know how to do their job better than anyone because they do that day in, day out. The CEO's not going to be able to tell him how to do his job better. So then that person will be able to say, you know what, I understand that I'm supposed to do this and this to feed into that overall goal. So you know what, if you could just give me this extra button here or develop me this extra interface here, then I'll be able to do it better. And that's that's the trick. It's not as simple as just saying, I'll ask everyone what they think. If they're not totally aware of what we're trying to do as a company,
that's right,
and you don't include everyone in that vision, then you'll be asking, and people go, well, I don't know what you want from me. You told me yesterday to do this. I'm just doing
so true.
it.
That is so true. I can't, how many times I've asked leaders not only what their mission is, but what their core values are. And they don't know what their core values are. And I'm sitting there thinking, wait a second, your core values are the filters for which you run your decisions through. So if you don't even know what they are, how can you be making decisions that are aligned with your core values? It's scary. It's really scary. And it's something that's so important to me. So going back to that question though, because I really, this is really simple and so obvious, Daniel, I know. And you're going to be like, why is she asking me this question? But, I mean, I have to put it out there. So we've talked about why it's so important to ask, right? But why don't we simply just ask? Why don't leaders ask their teams for feedback?
So I think that it all comes, unfortunately, a lot of it comes down to ego, I think.
Yes.
Let's face it, some people will say, oh, it's the boss, why should he be worried about his job? But people are, people actually are. And sometimes people don't want to be told, oh, you know what, I didn't like the way you managed me last month or whatever. People aren't open. People fall into this trap of thinking, well, I'm the boss, so no one's going to tell me how to do my job. Or maybe my boss will tell me, but no one else. He's wrong, But on the other hand, I don't want to judge people, because if people are feeling insecure in their workplace, maybe it's their environment that's not giving them that place. It's not just the employees at the bottom level. It's every single level needs to feel empowered to be able to have their voice and just to say, listen, I don't feel right with this, or I do feel right with it, And what stops that often is ego, a bit of jockeying for position. If someone's like, well, hang on, if I speak up about that, I might lose the opportunity for getting promoted here, whatever, And these are not simple things; these are complex, and there's no one simple answer to this. I just think that at the core of an organization, if you can take ego out of the question, which is very rare, very, very rare, because everyone has their ambitions, and you want people to have their ego, but in a positive way, but not in a way that actually impacts negatively other people.
Yes.
But that's not easy. People are inherently often greedy, maybe envious of others. The grass is always greener, all this sort of stuff. But every organization looks like it does from the top, and that's one of the reasons why nobody looks like nobody, because you've got the chief nobody at the top, who is the least egotistical person I think you can imagine, and that's why all the people that surround him and work under him are exactly the same. It's devoid of ego. It's all leaning off each other for the greater good, and that's exactly what you want in an organization. So, if you're a boss who is driven by your ego, it's going to be difficult to tell someone to change his character. But generally, try and step out of yourself and try and also identify if there are people, or senior management, middle management, who are like that, and they could be total rock stars in what they're doing. They could be the best software developer in the world, but they have that political aspect to it. And it's just try and get rid of it, because it can be so toxic, so damaging.
Oh yeah, and that's why it's a Nobody Studios, right? Is that we want to leave the ego outside of what we're doing, and it isn't easy for everybody. And so I love that. I think that's a major reason why leaders don't ask for feedback. And another one is simply just fear, right? People are afraid. Like, what if I ask? What if I ask Daniel about my culture manifesto and he thinks it's garbage, and now he's not going to respect my work, right? I mean, and so, but I think it's important that we can't be afraid of the answers, because here's the thing: we'd rather know now than spend like millions of dollars and then get to a point and learn about it when the thing, like building companies. That's why we have the progressive model. Is we don't want to spend a lot of money on building a company. And then now you ask, and now your customers are like, wait, that's not even what we need, right? We need this. So really great ego, leave the ego out, and don't be afraid to ask for feedback. And so I have one more question for you. I think, as you know, we're doing our equity crowdfunding campaign right now, which we only have I think it's under 13 days left now, 12 days or so left. It's where anybody can invest in the studio for as less than $100, right? And so I was talking to you about this before we started and pressed the live button, is that I feel like a lot of people still don't understand what we're doing and why they should invest in our studio. And you're one of our early investors. You've been a supporter of what we're doing. What makes Nobody Studios unique? And what were some of the things you looked at when you were, deciding where to put your hard-earned money, right? So can you give some guidance to people that maybe aren't, your traditional investor, who haven't had the opportunity like me to invest prior to this situation, right? For just like the regular normal person that has never invested before, what are some things to keep in mind about this? Because again, people, listen, it's $100. That's less than what you pay for a dinner and a glass of wine somewhere, right? So pay attention to this and do your due diligence. Don't just take my word on it or Daniel's word on it, but listen to the guidance he's giving you and do your research, right? So please, Daniel, if you could share some tips for people on that issue.
So generally, one of the things that it bothers me a little bit, and I'm part of that. I'm an investor, and the whole investment, the venture world, is very restricted to people, I'd say, with enough money to put into companies, and so it's quite exclusive. Let's face it. And if you don't have a certain amount of money, then you're not going to be an investor. It's as simple as that. And so you've got a tiny tranche of people with a lot of money who are investors, and then the vast majority of people who are not, and they never will be. And all of a sudden along comes Nobody Studios. And it's not the first option. There are various crowdfunding efforts that have gone on around the world, but I won't give my views now. Just, we don't want to focus on that, on why I don't really believe in many crowdfunding opportunities that have gone on in the last 20 years or so. I just think it's more like pyramid schemes. But all of a sudden, Nobody Studios comes along and gives an opportunity for people who otherwise wouldn't be exposed to that. It's inclusive. It's all what we're talking about, part of our values and part of our culture. Yeah. It gives that opportunity to people to actually have the benefits of an investment in venture. And it's on two levels. It's not just, anyone who invests in Nobody, we all hope for positive return in the next few years, of course. But it's more than that. The benefits I'm getting as an investor since I've been involved are a lot to do with things that are nothing to do with money. I'm connected now to people that I would never have been connected to if it wasn't for the studio. Not a month goes past that someone from the studios, normally Jason or maybe Tiffany or Mark himself, will say, "Oh, Daniel, we've met this person I'd love to introduce because he's in sports, you're in sports." And it's connection, and connections are valuable, and you learn more with every single connection, and who knows where that can lead, whether it's commercial or just enriching our lives in some way. So anyone who's invested, it will open your minds to things. And I was so delighted for the first time ever to go to a lot of my friends and say, "Hey, there's an opportunity here," which is, and I always say the same thing. It doesn't matter what level you are, whether you're investing $1 billion or $100, don't invest what you can't afford to lose if it's in venture.
That's right.
But $100 ticket, 100, 200, there's a lot of people who could afford to put that down. Let's face it. It's not everyone, not the whole of the world, but there's a lot of people that I know and that that's like, what? Like you said, it's like the cost of a meal.
Yes.
Put $100 and you will gain two things. One is hopefully that 100 will become 1,000 in years to come. And our projections show that it should, and even much more than that. Yeah. But also that's not life-changing, is it? Let's face it. But don't invest beyond what you think you can lose, because it is venture at the end of the day. But you will also all of a sudden be exposed to a world that you would not otherwise see. And you will get the updates from the studio about which companies are being acquired, what partnerships are being made. And you know what? That is enriching. It's enriching people's minds. And just because people don't have the finances to invest traditionally doesn't mean that they don't have a brain that's there ready to be enriched. And who knows what that can do to their lives. And I've been so delighted to involve a number of friends and say, "Listen, I fully recommend this. Get on board, because you've got a lot to benefit from being there." And it's just been that, I think, is the main thing, is understanding that it's an inclusive path to enrichment on many levels.
Daniel, you're incredible. And I just want to add one other thing to that is when you invest, you're not only investing in the studio, right? So again, we're one of the first crowdfunded studios, but everybody's getting a benefit, not only to have a stake in the studio, but and all of our portfolio companies. So so that means for $100, you're basically getting 100 companies, because we're going to be building 100 companies in the next 5 years. So think about that you're not just, usually when you bet in you invest in a startup, you're investing in the one company. and everything is going, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. Here, you're putting it into 100 different baskets for $100. So it's basically like $1. You're investing $1 in each of the companies that we're going to be building, right? So I think that's very important to keep in mind. And also, because you have a piece of stake, in the game, you're more likely to, hey, I'm really excited about that company that you're building. I want to contribute my talent to that. Or I know Daniel, he's in the sports industry, and we want to get him on the advisory board. So there's just endless opportunities for you to contribute aside from your money to any of those 100 companies. So, we really want to encourage people to give this an opportunity. So we're out of time, Daniel. Again, is there anything else you want to add on anything we've talked about today? Thank you again for accepting my invitation. But is there anything last, maybe one piece of advice you want to give to investors as they're considering this incredible opportunity?
So I'll actually touch on the other side of it, which is what you almost said just before, is not just the investment side, but there are a lot of people. I'm sure everyone knows someone who is a sort of a wannabe entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is really tough. It's really tough. It's scary. You don't know if you're going to keep the lights on next month, let's face it. Mm-hmm. But the Nobody Studios actually gives a really nice place for wannabe entrepreneurs to try and live their dream a little bit. Because like you said, if you're involved in the studio in some way, you can come and say, hey, I've got an idea. And we've got an ideation lab run by Mick, which is great. He's such a lovely guy. And you can say, I've got an idea. Let me throw that idea out there. And instead of being on your own, because entrepreneurship is a very lonely place, you can be part of this and get the wrapping of a studio. So you could live this wonderful life of being a bit of an investor at a small level that doesn't hurt your pocket too much or doesn't risk your pocket too much. And being an entrepreneur, if you want to, you can actually bring your ideas where most of us, let's face it, will be too scared to go and chase those dreams. I had a chat with a friend of mine yesterday. He's almost 60, and he was telling me about how he had dreams of doing, and this wasn't a talk about the studio at all. This was just him telling me about how when he was 40, he had this opportunity, he didn't go for it. When he was 30, he had this opportunity, didn't go for it. And I look at him and I'm like, he's almost 60, and he gave up on those opportunities. And I don't know if they would have come to fruition or not. Most likely they wouldn't have done because it's risky. But if there was an opportunity to get some wrapping around it, like the studio can give, this is really interesting, I think. So that was the only thing I wanted to add, is that investors, entrepreneurs, it gives a great opportunity to both sides.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'll just add, it's so interesting when you were talking, because when I was growing up, I didn't really have a lot of ideas, because I was just work hard and just get through school. I threw myself into the books, But since joining the studio, Daniel, like all of a sudden, like it's that thing that now you're thinking about that. And I'm having ideas, like I'll be on a hike, and I'm like, oh, there's this idea. And I'm like, wait, so it's that now you have that opportunity. And so it's incredible to say, well, I'll be slacking Min all the time, or directing manager, to say, what do you think about this? Or how can we make this better? And like, I never had that part of my brain activated like that before. So it's super exciting. Thank you again, Daniel. So look, if you're interested in joining our journey, we welcome you. Go check us out, invest. We only have a few days left, and I'll see you tomorrow. I am going to be meeting with an incredible subject matter expert on talent recruitment, Adam Posner. So join me tomorrow, and thank you again, Daniel. Everybody have a great day.
Take care.
Bye.